Yeah. Yeah. You hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll make it loud.
We gratefully acknowledge the generosity of the persons who are sponsoring learning in Torah Or. Okay, including people who paid for a year of learning, friends of Stephen Vigner, Lezecher Nishma Simcha Melech Ben Meir Lev Halevi, friends of Marcy Kurtz in memory of her great niece Leah Bracha Bas Rivka, Isaac and Evelyn Blacher in memory of his sister Chaya Rachel Bas Iser, friends of Leonie Meiselman, Leah Sabra Bas Chanach Zundel. 2 months of learning, friends of Milton Miller in honor of his second bar mitzvah, i.e. his 83rd birthday. Month of learning, Chaim and Phyllis Reese in memory of his father, Mordechai ben Yom Tov Lipa. And they also paid a second time for a second name, Phyllis and Chaim Reese in memory of her father, Pinchas ben Avraham. Isaac and Evelyn Blacher in memory of his mother, Zisel Bas Chaim Yitzchak, Reuven Zev and Susan Podolsky in memory of his mother, Fredel Bas Shraga Feivel, Rabbi Dr. Yaakov and Malka Honig in memory of his sister, Chava Bas Harav Simcha Ben Yamin, his brother, Tzvi Aaron Zev Ben Harav Simcha Ben Yamin, his father, Harav Simcha Ben Yamin Ben Rav Yosef Yitzchak, and her mother, Sosa Bas Choina. Be Pizer in memory of her sister, Rita Greenberg. A week of learning, family of Danny Shepetovsky in memory of Daniel Ben Aaron David. Marcia Fried and her family in memory of Milton Yitzchak Mordechai Ben Abraham. And today is the 21st? 22nd. Ruth Kostman in memory of her father, Yisrael Yosef Ben Yaina, and Gail and Milton Meller in memory of her daughter, Rachel Shoshana Bas Simcha Gedalia. Okay. So the topic which we are engaged in is a fellow came, his name was Yishmael, and he came with an onion to different rabbis. This onion had grown during Shemitah year, was removed from the ground, and then was replanted in the 8th year and generated a zillion new onions. So this fellow came and he asked first Ravami. Ravami didn't have an answer. And then he asked Rav Yitzchak Nafka, what's the deal with this once upon a time Shemitah onion? Is it bottled to all the other new onions, which are 8th year onions, and therefore can be eaten? Or are they bottled to it? You know, in other words, are they a forbidden growth because they came from, you're not supposed to replant this onion and you can't eat any of them? Or are they edible because they're new onions? And this thing is not usable because it's a illegal Shemitah onion. Okay, so Rav Yitzchak Nafka says that since there are so many new onions, the Shemitah onion is bottled to the new onions. So either Rav Yirmiyah or Rav Zrika said, how could you say that? There are at least 2 rabbis who paskin fakir, who paskin you can't eat it because it's not bottled. Okay, and then we went through a few possibilities of how to upslug the 2 rabbis who said you can't eat it, and we concluded in both cases that they are special cases, because the net result of saying that the old onion is subsumed by the new onions, is bottled to the new onions, you would have to give more onions as meiser. And so that's a chumrah. And the second one was also a chumrah. So those could be special cases, and it's still 2-1. Okay, now the very last line of Nun Zion Amid Base, 57b. Ella. So how are we going to try and upslug the minhada from the following brisa? The Sanya Rabbi Shimon Aimer Rabbi Shimon says regarding Beetle, turn the page. Kol davar sheyesh lo matirin. Anything that either can be, it's an usher right now, but you can either do something or simply wait a while and it'll become mutter. Okay, so anything that's forbidden now but can be or will be mutter at a later date, kagon tebel, untithed produce. So how do you rectify it? You take trumas and meisers. Now you can eat it. So you're not allowed to eat it before. You do something. You take trumas and meisers, and now 89% of it you can eat. Okay, or meiser sheni. Reuven grew wheat in his farm. He took meiser. He gave it to Bob the Levi. Bob can't eat it. It's usher until Bob takes 1/10 of what he received and gives it to a Kohen. So by acting to take Trumas Meiser, Bob can make the maser that he can't eat edible. So it's a davar sheyesh lo matirin. Or hektish. I have a sheep. I decide to use it as a korban. But it's too much of a pain in the neck. I realize I have to schlep all the way to Yerushalayim, but I made it hektish, so nobody can eat it. So what do? I redeem it on money, okay? And then I use the money to buy a different korban, presumably. But the kedusha from the hektish sheep is now transferred to the money, and anybody who wants can eat that sheep. So by being paid it, you can turn it from a no to a yes.
Maybe I haven't been here for 2 weeks, but maybe you're fixing the same thing. But if you're taking something else and trying to fix something else,
we're not fixing. The question is, can this object or this food stuff, which is ill? No, I'm not talking about the onion anymore. I'm bringing in a brisa that, because what did we say is the basis of maybe being able to eat the onion? That it's bottle to all the other onions. It's a Shemitah onion, but it looks just like all the other onions. There are now 43 onions. Is the Shemitah onion bottle? So Reb Shimon is coming up with rules of what can be and what cannot be bottle. That's what we're talking about. Okay, your question is like premature, because if something, well, I'll just say it outside. If something is forbidden now, but can be made mutter or will automatically become mutter with the passage of time, then it can never be bottled. Okay, that's the beginning of setting up a situation. So the Gemara just simply tells us in this brisa, kol davar sheyesh lo matirin, anything that you can make mutter or that will automatically become mutter under certain circumstances. Okay, and now it interrupts itself and it gives you an idea of things like on that list. Kigun tevel, we just explained. Meiser sheni, we explained. Hektish, we explained. Chadash. You have wheat grown before Pesach. That's called chadash. You can't eat it. However, as soon as they burn the korban omer in the days of the Beis Hamikdash, or until the second day of Pesach has past, even nowadays, Chadash automatically turns into Yashan. So you could not eat it Erev Pesach, but on Chol Hamoed Pesach, you could eat it if you made matzah out of it, and it's not chametz, obviously. All right, or after Pesach, you can eat it. So there you don't have to do anything except wait it out. So that is another example of something that's a davar sheyesh lo matirin that will automatically become mutter. Lo nisnu behen chachamim shiur. Okay, literal it means the rabbis did not assign a measure because minatayra, but one thing is batal in two. Midrabanan, typically one thing is batal if its taste disappears in the mixture, which they pick a number 1 in 60. Okay. But other things have other measures. But if it's a davar sheyesh lo matirin, there is no measure, meaning it cannot be batal. Okay, you got it? You look puzzled. Okay, so kol davar she'ein lo matirin, something that there is no way to rectify it. Time won't do it. Acting on it won't do it. Pig meat. There's no way of making pig meat kosher. However, if a tiny little piece of pig meat falls into, not is put, but falls accidentally into a huge cauldron of kosher meat, it's batal. And you can eat the whole thing. And you're not even allowed, as Rabbi Hirschberg said yesterday, to pretend I'm a big machmir, I'm not going to eat it. Okay? So, Kigon, what is the list of things that can that not be rectified? Kigon Truma. If you separate Truma, it's automatically restricted to only to a Kohen. And there's no way to fix it. All right, so somebody read the footnote, and there actually is a way to fix it, but that's untruma-ing it. It doesn't remain true. In other words, you could dump the truma back into the Kri and start over. But once it's in the hands of the Kohen, there's no rectification. O trumas meiser, similarly, if Bob gives his trumas meiser to Mel, and now it's in Mel's hands, it can never be de-trumed. Okay, challah, the portion of an isa, of a dough that's separated and was once given to the Kohanim is today burned, cannot be restored. Orla, the first 3 years of a tree's existence, any fruit that tree would happen to bear, like a blueberry bush bears in the second year, that's orla. Those fruit are asur b'hano. There's nothing you can do for them. Okay, klei hakeren. If you have a diverse species of crops grown within a certain proximity of each other, that's called klei hakeren, and nothing growing in that patch of the farm can be eaten. It's asur b'hano. Okay, and there's no rectification for these things.
You said there was no rectification for truma either, but you gave us.
If it's in the hands of the Kohen. This is the list of no rectifications. Okay, so I just pointed out that there is a technicality that before you give it to a Kohen, you could start over. But once it's truma and in the hands of a Kohen, there's no way a non-Kohen can eat it. Okay?
There's no technicality on any of the other.
No, with the other things, you could fix it. Tevel, you could take trumas and maasros. Chadash, you could wait till it's yashan. But here, truma is truma today, and in 6 months, it's still truma. And if I take some away from it, it's less truma, but it's still truma. There's no fixing. Okay, so those things are usher, at least to most people, right? If in the case of truma, those the rabbis did. Nasnu behem chachamim shiur. In the case of those things, the rabbi said if they accidentally get mixed in with regular stuff, there is a ratio in which they are nullified. Okay, going through the list, truma and trumas meiser is 100-1, meaning 100 if there's one of these and 100 of the others, the one is nullified in a pile of 101 or more. With regard to challah, it's 100 to 100, 1 to 100, again, 1 in 101. Orla and kalayim, it's 1 in 201. So 200 overwhelms the 1. If it's okay. So those are the rules. And now, so Reb Shimon has now set up what the issues are. And the rabbis interrupt him. Omer lo, halo shviyis ein lo matirin. What about shviyis products, 7th year products? There's no way to be matir them. So there should be a ratio in which they are nullified. So going back to the original question, if let's say the ratio is 1 in 200. So if there are now 216 onions, the first onion would be nullified. If you argue shviyas has no rectification. So v'halo nasnu bo chachamim shiur. But the fact of the matter is that the rabbis did not create a ratio for shviyas produce. This not because we have a brisa that says hashviyas iseres kol shehu b'mina. So let's come back to the onions. According to this, I'll translate that shviyas produce ushers similar produce, no matter what the ratio is. So if you have 1 Shemitah onion and a goy tosses it into a boxcar with 750,000 onions in it, the whole boxcar is asur bahana. That's what the rabbis point out to Reb Shimon. So then Reb Shimon says, thank you for interrupting me. May I continue my brisa? And he says, Omer lahem, he says to them, Af ani lo omarti ela b'biur. No, you misunderstand. There is with regard to Shemitah. If it's acquired, if the Shemitah produce is acquired legitimately, meaning you wandered into Harry's field and you picked an apple that was growing, it's hefker, anybody can pick an apple. You can't pick a bushel of apples, but you could pick enough apples for 2 meals for your wife to make an apple pie, okay? Or you bought it from an otzer. There's a system by which, since we don't want everybody trampling in everybody else's field, they set up a legitimatizing system where they gather Shemitah produce and they sell it not for profit, okay? Then you can eat it. However, for each kind of produce, there is a date, not a date, but a calendar date, which from that date on, you will not find that type of produce in the field anymore. Now, all the apples are gone arbitrarily. This is not the actual date, by April 8th. Okay. So on April 7th, you can still eat the Shemitah apple. But on April 8th, you have to take it, you have to either destroy it or you have to make it hefker. In other words, you're not after the date whether you couldn't find it in the field anymore, you can't eat it anymore. So the girsa we have is af ani lo amarti. I say that there is this burn date. And another girsa is you agree with me that there is this burn date. And so we're only talking about before the burn date, where you can nullify Shemitah because you could have picked it properly. You could go back and get a different apple. So then there is a shear, a nullification number. Aval le'achila, but with regarding eating from the boxcar after the apple burn date, when somebody tossed the Shemitah apple into the boxcar, tough noogies. You can't eat them. Maybe you could ship them to somewhere that's not Jewish, but no, it's Asir Bahano, so you can't even do that. Okay? So now I said that there is a sheer number for before the burn day. So he explains, Benoising Tom, the sheer number is where it's overwhelmed, so it doesn't change the taste, and the rabbis assign 1 in 60. So if you have 61 and one of them is a Shemitah, then it doesn't change the taste of the mixture. It's a red onion, the other's a real yellow one, whatever it is. So therefore, there is a nullification, and maybe Reb Nachman was right and the other rabbis were wrong. Okay? So they want to challenge this.
Right.
Okay? Because now we've knocked out the 2 rabbis and the guy can eat his onion. But they say, just like in the previous 2 cases, Dilma Hanami Chmurashain. Maybe here too, where there's a chumrah involved, that's a different story, and you can't analogize from that to upslug the 2 rabbis. Elamin hada pashta. Let's try again. Literally from the following, we can answer the question. Okay, the Tanan, we have a Mishnah. Bitzolim sheyordu aleihem geshamim v'tzimchoi. All right. Typically, onions, farmers have something called a root cellar, where it's cold and dark, and they would store onions and potatoes and carrots, root vegetables, beets in the root cellar. We put some, like the onions, maybe in a basket in a cool, dark spot in the kitchen. Other people put them in the drawer of the refrigerator. In those days, after you picked your beets or your onions, they would bury them in sand as a way of keeping them so you could eat them in the winter when it's not growing season anymore. Okay? So we have a Mishnah. Reuven had his 6th year onions, and he picked them in the summer just before Shemitah, and he buried them in a sandbox in the backyard, the one the kids, the grandchildren don't play in. But it was the rains came early, the sand got wet, and the onions responded to the moisture and started sprouting, started growing into plants again. Okay? We learn it from the following. B'tzelem sheyardu aleihem geshamim v'tzimchu. The onions were buried in a sandbox, and it rained on them, and they started sprouting.
And they're sprouting in Shemitah year.
And this is now, right, it's now the 7th year. Em hoyu olin shilahan shachairin asurin. All right, we have to make a decision. Is this growth insignificant and it's still a 6th-year onion? Or is this growth significant and it happened in Shemitah year to turn the onion into a Shemitah onion? So the Chachamim say, think about a scallion or a green onion. If you have the dark outer leaves that stick out from the bulb, but if you break some of them off, there'll be a little light green or almost yellow leaf at inside. Okay, so the rabbis say, Im hoyu alin shilahem shechayrin, if this onion's new sprouting is dark green asurin, we consider it having had significant growth in Shemitah year, and you can't now dig it out of the sandbox. That would be a harvesting modality. Okay. However, Hariku mutarin, if they're light green or still yellowish, you can eat them. The new growth is considered insignificant. Like your wife has an onion that's been in a drawer for a couple of weeks and it's got a shoot coming out of it. So she cuts that off and she uses the onion. Even if it was a Shemitah onion, that would be the rule. Okay, that's the rabbi's defining term, the color and the length of the shoots. Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus Omer, he comes up with another answer that's a little bit, that in my opinion is sort of more elegant. Okay, Im yacholin letalesh balin shehen asurin. If you can grab the growth and the growth itself is sturdy enough that you pull on these new shoots and you yank the whole onion out of the sandbox, then they're sturdy enough that they're called significant, and you can't, it's usher to eat the onion. Okay. But if they, so the corollary is if they're very tender and when you pull on them you break them off, then it's not considered significant growth and you could take the onion out of the sandbox. Okay, that's at the beginning of Shemitah. What about at the end of Shemitah? L'meimra digidule heter Mylin es ha'isur. At the so this would tell us that if the new growth is permitted, meaning it's either it's still insignificant either by color or by strength, then that would be nullify the forbidden root at the end. So you do the same test at the end, and if you can get the onion out, then you say there's significant 8-year growth, and that nullifies the Shemitah status, and therefore you can eat the onion. Or if you can't get it out, then it's still a Shemitah onion. Okay? So we see now that new growth does nullify old growth, and you don't even need a high ratio. It's just a little shoot. So that kind of knocks out the two rabbis who say that the onion is not usable.
Or a color.
What?
Or a color, right? Or the color. That also matters now, no?
Well, depending on which of the two standards you like. Okay, I like the pull-out standard because it's more clear. I don't have to get a colored chart and ask some rabbi, does this color qualify? I mean, you give a yank, if it breaks, it breaks. If it comes out, it comes out. So that's a very clear, I think it's more elegant. Mm-hmm. So that would be how I would pick onions. You're entitled to pick onions the way you want.
Do it either way?
You could. It doesn't tell us which is right. So you pays your money, makes your choice. Okay? So Dilma, so now the Gemara, remember, the whole point of all of this is the one guy right or are the two guys right? And we're trying to challenge the two guys. But typically, you don't want to do that. You go after the road. So now the Gemara says, but this is a pretty good rationale to say the two guys are wrong. So we have to come up with why this is a special case and cannot challenge them. So the Gemara says, Dilma b'meduchonin. Maybe they mushed up the onion before they planted it. The concept here being, if you destroy the onion, then it's no longer a Shemitah onion, right? So then there's no shaila on whether you can eat it or the other onions. It's not a Shemitah onion. So maybe this brisa is talking about a crushed onion, so it wasn't really a Shemitah onion at all. Okay, so we knock out that teretz, and we're still back to 2-1, and Yishmael can't eat his onion. So Ella min hada. So we'll try again from another brisa. The Sanya, we have another brisa. Turn the page. Ha menakesh es hakusi b'chasayos. Okay. You are hired out to help a farmer trim his crop. Yeah, like if anybody ever had a rose bush, you snip off the new branches so all the energy of the plant goes to making roses rather than new branches. So similarly with certain crops, you either, the two interpretations here, either you snip off some of the growth so it doesn't produce a flower and go to seed, and it uses all its energy to make new bulbs and bigger bulbs. So you snip off, or you planted a bunch of tiny little cocktail onions, and now they're growing, and you have to yank some of them out of the ground to make room for the others. So the word ha'menakesh means one or both of those techniques. In any event, you're trimming the growth or removing some growth. So there is a halacha that a workman dealing in a field with its foodstuffs cannot be told he can't nibble on stuff. If you're picking apples, you're allowed to nibble an apple. And if you want to ask, yeah, but no, they're tevel. Nobody took trumas and maestras. They're not yet tevel until they're reached a conclusion of the harvesting process for that species. Okay, so for wheat, it's after you get the seeds out of the calyxes and stuff. For apples, it's after you put them in the storeroom. Each produce has its when it's finished rule. Okay, so now we have this produce, and I'm picking out, and I now have a little scallion in my hand. And it's not, it's 10:30 in the morning. The last I ate was at 8 o'clock. I had a cup of coffee. I'm allowed to nibble on the scallion. And it might even be a scallion picked by the Kusi, who's a non-Jew. Ma'asirin vadai. However, if I were to take all these little baby scallions, let's say we did the removing scallions technique, and I put them in a basket and I brought them into my wife and say, here, you can make something with the scallions. Now they're tevel, and I would have to take trumas and maestras. And if I got them from the Kusi, they're vadai tevel, because he didn't do otherwise. So Reb Shimon ben Eliezer Omer, what if you were picking not with a Kusi, but with a not from Jew? Okay, Im Yisrael chashad al hashvius. If you're talking about a non-religious Jew who's not makbid on shvius, and you're doing this pruning early in the 8th year, where it could possibly be that he planted them before Shemitah year was up. Okay. L'maitze shvius mutter. Even though that's a possibility, what you prune in the 8th year is still permitted to be eaten. Okay. Lamemra. So this seems to be a proof we can now say the Gidule Heter Ma'alen Esa'isur. This is a non-religious Jew. He most likely planted the little baby onions before Shemitah year was up. He hired you to prune. You're allowed to eat the ones you pull out or the snippings. So that's a raya that the new stuff overwhelms the old stuff, and the old stuff is buckled to the new stuff. So now we've upslugged the two rabbis, right? Dilma b'davar shezerei kaloi. Maybe we're talking, you can, in addition to planting bulbs, if you can let an onion go to seed, you can let it produce a flower and make seeds, and you could plant onion seeds, and they too will turn into onions. So maybe we're
Got a problem. What happened? Lost picture and sound. Harvey, I'm gonna.
garlic, leeks, red onions, ramps, scallions, all those things are alliums, and they're usually produced from Tanya Eluhan Chasarios, that we were talking about alliums, Kigon, and now it interrupts and it gives you a list, a non-exhaustive list. Love, hashum, garlic, habitzalim, types of onions. Okay, so therefore, these do not. Hello, you back?
Back. Yeah.
Okay, so we just said maybe they planted onion seeds, and we answered no. We're talking about the normal way to produce alliums, which are all the onion-like products, and they're normally made from bulbs. Okay, so now Dilma b'midur chanim. Maybe, once again, we didn't want to have a problem, so we smushed the baby onions before we planted them. Okay? So that would now also be an exception, and therefore we don't have a right.
If you smush them before you plant them, they're not going to germinate, right?
They're not going to grow.
I cannot hear you. I don't know what's happening, but you want to...
The question was, if you crush them, does that prevent them from growing?
No, it lets them grow, but it's destroyed them, so they're not any chasash of Shemitah produce. You take a Shemitah onion and you bash it with a mallet. Okay, it's still got the nutrients in it, and it's still got the beginnings of the possibility of rooting. So it might grow, but it is not an edible onion anymore. People don't normally eat mushed up onions. So you avoid the Shemitah issue. We had this once before. So in any event, so now it's again possibly a special case. Okay? So now we're going to try a chashud al hashvi'is katane. But our Mishnah, our Brisa rather, told us we're dealing with a Jew who doesn't give a darn about Shemitah. So why would he bother crushing it? He doesn't care. He'll plant a nice, whole, gorgeous Shemitah onion, and he's not at all concerned with our halachic problems with his produce, so he doesn't bother smashing it. So now the Gemara says, okay, but Dilma Bataruvas. Maybe we're talking about planting scallions and red onions. I do not know whether planting scallions and red onions would be kalayim or not. So that's simply an example. Don't come back tomorrow with Shulchan Aruch telling me that you can't do that. Okay, it just says taruvos. So there is something you can plant together with the onions and it would not be an issue. So now maybe what you were nibbling on were the other things, okay? So hamanakesh katani. The Brisa says you're pruning the onion patch or clearing some of the onions out of the onion patch. So obviously you're dealing with onions. You're not dealing with a mixture of permitted varieties. Okay? So lema tahave to yufte the Rabbi Yochanan, the Rabbi Yonason. So now that's a pretty good raya, and the Gemara wonders, have we now successfully upshlugged the two rabbis who argued, and we're left with the one opinion, and Yishmael can eat his onion. Okay? So, but we're not finished. We're never finished, right? Roma, Reb Yitzchak, Shanya Shviyis. The rules of Shviyis are different than the rules of other kinds of Isurim. A pig is a pig, whether it's here or there, whether it's last year or this year. Okay? Orla is Orla because it's the first 3 years. Okay? Hoil, the Isura al Yedei Karka. But Shvius is unique in that the Isser comes from the fact that it was planted in Eretz Yisrael, in ground in Eretz Yisrael, during the 7th year, or within the month before the 7th year, if you want to get technical. Okay? So, the telosa nami al yedei karka. So therefore, if there's a methodology by which to be mavatal it, for instance, growing it till it has a zillion onions, the only way to be mavatal it would be through growing in the ground, meaning in the 8th year. Okay? So, hare meiser de isuru al yedei karka. So the Gemara says, yeah, but who says Shemitah is so unique? After all, Trumas and Maisras are only taken from produce, and that produce has to be grown in the ground. I mean, if it's hydroponically grown, is a machlaikis. Some say with the Rabbanan you can take Trumas and Maisras, but the point is that the concept of farming is in the ground. V'ein v'tilasu al yedei karka. You can't nullify trumas and maestras. You can't take that and by simply making it grow more. Desanya, we can prove it. Litra meiser tevel shazor of the karka. I take a liter of seeds that have not had trumas. Yes.
Isn't a litra 1/10 of a liter approximately, or less than a tenth?
I'm translating it liter. It's 1/10 of an omer, I think. In other words, it's a not insignificant measure. That's a fraction of a significantly larger measure. So for simplicity's sake, we're not planting, and we don't have to measure our wheat kernels. So I'm just translating it liter because that's simple. If you rather call it a quart or just call it a scoopful, be my guest. Okay? So you have untithed meiser, litra meiser tevel. You have the meiser hasn't, but you haven't taken truma. Now he didn't take meiser, trumas meiser from it. Shizorka the karka, and that's planted in the ground. Vehish bicha, and it grows. That you do this at the end of the 6th year, and it takes root and grows in the Shemitah year. Vaharehi ka'aser litrin, and it's multiplied by a factor of 10. Okay. Now here's a rule. Shemitah produce does not have to have meiser and truma taken from it. Remember, you can only take 2 meals worth. So it's not practical to start shaving pieces off your apple. So trumas and your putter from trumas and meisras on Shemitah year produce. Now you took this untithed material and planted at the end of the 6th year. So the new 10 grow in the 7th year. So you would think were 7th year produce, they would be putter from trumas and meisras. But since you planted untithed seeds, which theoretically you have to pluck out of the ground and tithe before you can put them back, anything that grows from them are still subject to tithing, even though normal Shemitah produce that grows by itself is not. Okay? So hashavicha, those little seeds turn into a whole bunch of. Now you could take those plants and take the seeds out, and you'd have 10 bushels or 10 liter of seeds. Harihi ke'eser litrin, you now have 10. Chayeves b'meiser b'shviyis. You still, even though normally you wouldn't, here you would have to take trumas and meisras. So what does that prove?
It's not.
That proves that they're not bottled, right? However, there's one little technicality. Since that 1 liter was planted already, and it's not practical to pull out all the little seeds and take trumas and meisras, you go to the storeroom and you take the trumas and meisras from a liter that you have that's not in the ground. Okay? Also, litra meiser aleha b'makom acher. You have to take them from somewhere else, lefi cheshbon, based on what you calculate to be the material you planted. And we'll stop there, and we'll pick up tomorrow. And I guess I'll still, Kenny, I'm still on.
If you will, please. Thank you very much.
Okay, very good. Have a refuah shlema. Everybody have a nice day. A freilich Hanukkah.
Anyone ever find my the Durham too?
Well,
Well,
My Gemara.
no, you left your vows somewhere else. You bleeding that there.
No, I didn't leave it anywhere else.
That was supposed to be a humorous comment.
Oh, that was funny. Oh.
very punny, yeah, very punny.
Well, pretty soon I'll be able to move on when the Durham is finished.
Okay.
Eventually it shows up. Whoever
Harvey,
brings it back.
do you remember where you messed up?
I think so. Yeah, what do you have, coffee?
Why does it go off?
I know, I know.
But Kenny does it doesn't go off. When I
We
do
have to go off. I know, what are you listening to?
you have
Check with Andrea why that,
what?
Yeah, I was going to.
Talking to somebody else.
why that might happen.
Yes.
Have a good
I have
day.
a feeling someone on Shabbos must have it.
Yes. Yes. He's certainly not a Shemitah. Whether
Alright.
you take Trumas
Harvey,
and
we also should check in the old library.
I checked in the old doc room, wasn't there.
It wasn't.
Irwin checked. Yeah. All right, we'll look around.
Yeah.
Eventually I'll find it.
I'm sure. All right, stay
All
well.
right. Thank you, Ken. Take care.
You too.